In case you don't know me, I'm Ed Gaze. I run the lab here. A lot of familiar faces, so if we haven't met and you have a chat, then catch me afterwards. Just to note, we're recording this session via webcam up there, so we'll record any questions. So if you want to ask a question, please indicate and we'll get a microphone to you. Also, just wanted to say we're trying to build a community, online community for the lab and people interested in innovation. If you want to join, we've got Lloyd's Lab Innovators group on LinkedIn. If you just search Lloyd's Lab Innovators, you'll see it and we'll let you in. And we've also got a Twitter account at Lloyds_lab. So feel free to follow us. Right, now the main event. So really happy to welcome Sharif Gardner, who I noticed is a former Royal Marine. But we might not hear much about that this time. We're going to hear more about cyber risks. So really looking forward to seeing a bit in the dark web, hearing about future innovations in cyber, all from Axis, from Sharif. So if you'd like to join us, give a round of applause.
Thank you, Ed. Let me just do a little bit of a setup.
I'm not allowed to go on the dark web on my laptop. So.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for having me. It's a nice packed room, standing from the front here. As I said, my name is Sharif Gardner. I head up the training and advisory services that we have at Axis Capital as part of our Axis Cyber Centre of Excellence. In the sort of wider security management space, we have a sort of methodology when we start to look at preventing, detecting, responding, and recovering to threats, and that's the deter, detect, delay, respond, and recover model. But when you're dealing with sort of wider physical security threats or any other threats that sort of don't have a cyber domain related to them, generally you can deter criminals, you can deter threats. You can deter employees from, being an insider threat. But the challenge is that we're not going to deter criminality that's conducted online, and hopefully I'll bring that to light as we go through this presentation. But I just want to open up with this. One of the biggest challenges that we have, certainly, not so much on the underwriting side, but I definitely know that this happens in the broking side when trying to, understand what cyber risk is all about and get clients to understand what cyber risk is all about. They met with this. Well, it's just an IT problem, surely, and the IT teams are sort of saying, well, you know what, we're very good at preventing attacks. We've got our firewalls, we've got our antivirus, we've got all of this stuff in place. This bit of tin just going to make all the problems go away. But the challenge is that actually, when you read this statement here, if an information or operational technology system is compromised or goes down, yes, the very first people you're going to be ringing up are your IT departments. I don't have access to my emails. I can't access certain file servers, so on and so forth. But put it into your business context. What happens if you can't, because your IT systems are down for a week and you can't service clients? Or if you're brokers and you can't get quotes to clients, or if you're underwriters and you can't get quotes to brokers? After a week, what's going to happen? They're going to go elsewhere, aren't they? And that very quickly becomes a business issue. That's why it's only a subset problem of the business or the business unit is supporting. If you think about this, a large broker, Aon, for example, 50,000 employees. If somebody from that organization accidentally sent out the personal records of, let's say they worked in the HR department, and I'm sure Aon have got good controls, fantastic controls in place to stop that from happening. But what if by accident or circumstance that 50,000 employee records ended up in the wrong hands just because somebody, fat finger typing, accidentally sent it out to the organization? Is that an IT problem? It very quickly becomes a business problem because someone's going to have to answer to someone, a regulator, possibly the press, and a whole host of others. So when the IT teams are turning around and saying, well, we've got it, we can stop all of these attacks, you only have to look at some of the high-profile cases that are out there that prove that this isn't necessarily the case. So as we look at cyber, we need to understand what actually is it. Well, firstly, cyber is actually a series of layers. We start to think, you ask, what's the internet, what's the cloud? And people go, well, it's the cloud, isn't it? The internet's just in in space, you know. Well, I remember the days of old where we were plugging, you know, modems and having dial-ups. I'm sure there's people in the room that remember a long time before that. But the reality is now you no longer need that. We actually look at it and go, well, it's just wireless. It's in the air. But actually, it's a series of networks. It's geographical networks that are physically connected. It's the things like our domain name servers that provide us with our domains, the .coms, the .co.uk's. And these things are physically connected. How are they connected? Fiber optic cables. 25% of the world's internet comes through Cornwall. Does anyone know that? Yeah. So forget all of this hacking and, you know, social engineering and you know, business interruption because you've been hit with a ransomware attack. Go and charter a vessel, cut through the cables in the Atlantic, and you'll cause a large level of disruption across the UK and beyond. But so beyond the physical networks, which are our sort of routers, our wireless towers, you know, the things that are disguised as trees these days, that's what's booming out signal, yeah? We've got our logical networks. And I like to sort of get quite interactive, so, but you know, would anyone disagree with this statement, that the world is built on software? If you think about it, you live online, you work online, you shop online, you play online. I guarantee that there's not one person in this room that hasn't been online this morning. So the whole way in which we interact and operate in our day-to-day lives has completely changed. I like to throw this one out there all the time, you know. I remember a time before the internet, but many of the people that I actually run training courses with don't. I've got 2 young boys, a 4 and a 2-year-old. They will never know what it's like to not be able to speak to your house. For them, the emergence of technology and real life is just normal. It just becomes normal real life. So cyber then moves into the people aspect, which is the thing that people actually tend to forget the most. Because why? Because they go back and they think, well, it's just an IT problem. My IT are on it. No, actually, it's not just an IT problem. Because we have people that actually connect things. People that misconfigure you know, firewalls. People that forget to update antivirus software. And what that does is starts to let problems into our lives. So we're very, very good, actually, when it is configured. The tech does work, by the way. You know, if it's configured correctly, if you update it properly, yes, your antivirus will bounce most of the common malware that's out there, most of the known malware, malicious software that's out there, most of the viruses that are out there. It works. What's the problem, though? People. People cut corners. People are lazy. People are leaving jobs every 1, 2, 3 years. And people just make mistakes. So that's why we do have these challenges. That's why we introduce risk. So then we have this lack of defense in depth because we're very, very good at preventing attacks. Yeah, prevent, but we're not very good at detecting them. And by the time we have detected them, it's almost too late. So we've got this soft underbelly. We don't have this defense in depth or defense in breadth as it's now being known. So, you know, when you look at this, prevention is ideal, but detection is a must. But without response, and this is the other thing that we're not very good at doing when we're dealing with cyber attacks, both from a, you know, at an IT level, getting malware off the system, stopping the bleeding, that sort of stuff. 2, how do we communicate? How do we communicate with our customers? How do we communicate with the press? How do we communicate with the regulators on this sort of stuff? So there's a whole host there. So we're not very good at with regards to that in terms of the detection and response side. Yep, here's my little shameless plug. This is where insurance helps on some of that sort of stuff. But anyway, that's a separate topic. So whilst prevention is ideal, detection is a must, but detection without response has little value. So it's the logical networks, which is where, you know, actually a lot of the devastation of cyber attacks hits. You know, it's going after software, and those software that then leads to disruption. You have to look at what happened in 2017 with the WannaCry outbreak and the NotPetya ransomware, or not, you know, destructive malware attacks. But then there's a people element to cyber. So we as all individuals, we are people. We interact with technology every single day. We're addicted. We're digitally addicted. And if you're not, your kids are. Okay, and if your kids aren't, your grandkids are. You know, the world is digitally addicted, myself included. You know, we all can't live without this sort of stuff. But for every one human being, every real person that interacts with this technology, we then have another layer of that. We have a cyber persona. We have a persona, a different way that we interact with different social media platforms, for example. I've got a quick question for everyone. Who here has a social media platform? A social media account? Facebook? Yep. LinkedIn? Who here communicates differently on their Facebook account than they do their LinkedIn? Yep. Who here's got the WhatsApp group, the one with the work colleagues? The one with your friends? Yeah, don't worry, I know that you're getting all the dodgy videos and pictures from the ones to your friends that you would be mortified if they ended up in the works one, but you're interacting with that technology in a different way. So we have this online disinhibition effect where we lose our inhibitions online to a degree. Things don't tend to shock us as much online. So we behave culturally different. These are our cyber personas. For every one human being, every one real person, we have 8 different cyber personas. That's 8 different ways in which we interact online. You know, one of our cyber personas loves things for free, so we can't help it when the offers come up. You know, ping, do you want something for free? Yep, so great. So you click on that. Unfortunately, that advert's just introduced malware in your system. And guess what? The IT guy was asleep or off or sick that day, and they forgot to configure and update the antivirus signature. So guess what? It's coming to your network, and now you've introduced ransomware into your network. So my point here is that actually, at a very human level, because we like things for free, because when we're interacting online, it feels real, it feels nice. This is why we're starting to fall victim more and more to this stuff. The WhatsApp scams, okay? Who has it? Where you get something free, you know, free WhatsApp, you know, free flights or free whatever. And we can't help it. We just want to click on that link, but we don't truly know what's going to happen after. And guess what? The criminals know this. So that's how they shape their scams that are hit towards us. Ashley Madison, an interesting case, an adultery website that its slogan was, "Life is short, have an affair." Forget all the reasons, the fact that you're guaranteeing discretion, you're guaranteeing security, you've got an SSL padlock and a whole host of other stuff. You know, you're guaranteeing anonymity of 37 million members. What does that tell a hacker? Oh, really? Yeah? Anyway, they got breached. But what was interesting about that was what happens is because that was not criminally motivated in the sense of making money. Most of the, you know, cyber crime or crime, you know, that involves sort of hacking or theft of data, you know, the majority of it is for criminal purposes, identity theft, insurance fraud, that sort of stuff. But in this instance, all these guys did was get 37 million email addresses and dump them online, dump them on Pastebin. And what happens then is there's a subset of criminal known as a scammer, who isn't a hacker, they're just a scammer. They're experts at extracting money out of people. And what they do is they send a very cleverly crafted email that says, you know, as of today, we, the hackers, have all of the details of personal profiles, sexual preferences, your messages between members, and much, much more than just your email. If you don't want us to release this data, send us you know, $300 in Bitcoin, and the problem goes away. What bit of information did they have? Just an email address. So the motivation to go after personal data, and just an email address. Just an email address. If I've asked everybody in this room to give me their email address, who wouldn't do it? It's information you give out every single day. But when you attach it to something, you add context to it. You look at another large data breach, JP Morgan. Huge investment bank. 4 bits of information were stolen from JP Morgan. I'm not going to go into the attack itself, but 4 bits of information criminals got away with. Name, email address, phone number, and address. Anyone seen Wolf of Wall Street? Yeah? What happens when you attach those 4 bits of information to 83 million JP Morgan accounts? It tells you that some people have got money, so you start sending the glossy brochures, you start with the phone calls, you start with the scam emails that saying, you know, put all your money into these stocks here, because in 3 years' time you're going to be a multi-millionaire. But guess what? They've bought all the stock. The scammers have bought all the stock. The criminals that got busted in that particular case were not what you would call ordinary criminals. It was headed up by an Israeli-American gang. The ringleader was a 31-year-old guy who ended up paying a $403 million fine to the SEC Commission, because within all the scam businesses, the Bitcoin exchanges that the guy was running, the football betting syndicates, the underground casinos, all of that sort of stuff, he had legitimate businesses as well. So that was not just a hacker in a hoodie that went after an organization. That was a very seriously organized criminal syndicate. So my point is the motivation to go after personal data will always remain a sort of top right threat. Why? Because there's so much you can do with it after, whether that's scamming someone, insurance fraud, or so on and so forth. So anyway, I digress. So we have cyber in all of these various layers. And information is either being processed in one of these layers, stored in one of these layers, and transited in one of these layers. And then we have this thing known as information assurance for all of those things there. And the one area of cyber that we don't really think about when we're looking at things like cyber insurance, for example, at the minute, is what's the ultimate attack on the trustworthiness of information? I'll give you a clue. It's hashtag. Anyone have a guess? Hashtag fake news. And has anybody seen the deep fakes, you know, the new AI fakes that are now starting to circulate? So there's a whole range of new ways in which that can start to influence, you know, and where that goes, who knows? But the point is cyber is touching every aspect of our lives. So moving on then, we've got, forget the size of the insurance market at the minute. Yeah, okay, we've got here on the left the global technology growth factors that are shaping the risk landscape. For all the reasons I've just said, we've got these cyber personas, the growth of social media. Now we're shifting all of our information to the cloud. No longer are we storing our information, you know, in an air-conditioned server room, in a room on a floor somewhere else. We're actually migrating our data over to the cloud. So from a resilience perspective, yeah, that's actually really good. The problem is there are really, really good cloud service providers, and there are some that are very budget. And the challenge is if you go after the very budget, sort of, you know, the budget level cloud service providers, what's the challenge? You have multiple users, sort of small businesses, bricks to clicks environments, most businesses going digital, the small coffee shop owners who are attached to this cloud because it's the cheapest way they can store their data. What happens when that cloud service provider goes down? Well, there was an instance of it going down in South Korea. You can only guess where the threat may be coming from there, where there was a cloud service provider, a web hosting firm, servicing 3,500 small businesses. They got hit with a nasty ransomware attack, hit with a ransom demand of $4.4 million. They managed to negotiate the criminals down after 8 days, down to $1 million. The CEO had to pay $1 million, but what happened to all of those 3,500 clients that were relying on his web hosting service? And imagine, flipping on its insurance head here now, imagine if each one of those 3,500 clients had a small, had a cyber insurance policy that covers network services liability and outsourced cloud service provider. So this is where the aggregation challenge comes in with insurance. But people think, oh, we can't underwrite it, we can't quantify it. But look, we understand the risk, we understand it's there, okay? But yes, there is work that we are doing. You know, there is a lot of work that we do within our research in terms of trying to understand exactly, you know, how far the breadth is. So what are the key risk areas that we've got with regards to cyber? Well, for all the reasons I just mentioned earlier, the number one risk that has brought this from a media attention perspective, from a regulatory perspective, from an insurance perspective, is privacy breach, that third-party element to cyber breaches. The fact that you're going to have to pay a fine, the fact that you're going to have to notify people, all of that sort of stuff. So these are some of the sort of key risk areas that we're dealing with. Then there's the transactional payments, so the e-theft payments, things like that. So if you think about, they're known as man-in-the-middle attacks, interception attacks. An organization, you've got an organization buying a widget from another organization. What happens when the organization that's supplying the widget gets hacked? Criminals have been on the network for a period of, 6 months. They're going straight for the accounts departments. They're looking at transactions, invoices that are about to be made. They see an invoice for $10 million just about to go down. But because they've hacked the company that's the supply company, but the supply company hasn't got any traditional signature-based antivirus running on any of its networks, it's running counterfeit software on its networks. So these guys have full unfettered access to the network. What they're able to do then is set up a domain, a new domain of that company's name, .com, .co.uk. And then what they do is just change the invoice at the last minute, change the bank account details, receive $10 million to a rogue bank account in Hong Kong. And then, has anyone heard of the Instagram money mules? Yep. I'll give you $1,000. You give me $800 back. You keep $200. You do that and you spread that. Do you think you're ever going to get your $10 million back? You're not. So this is how it's being done. So when we start to understand how easy that process is now, and I can show you, we'll show you sort of how criminality is now, how crime is now conducted online. And in the one of the most iconic buildings in the world, we can show you how that happens. When you think of the supply chain networks you'd have had to have built over time to be able to do that, now it's done through the click of a button. And why? Because everyone wants something for free. You know, the money mules want something for free, and they're addicted to you know, and they want to be popular, and they want to be helpful. You know, so that's how they fall victim to this sort of stuff. And then we have the extortion demands. We have the data and software loss and the reconstitution of that sort of data. These are some of the innovations that we're starting to see, you know, from a response side, but also, you know, from a coverage perspective, but also from a problem perspective. What happens when, you know, all of your software is riddled with malware to a point? We're starting to see it with the crypto jacking, the crypto mining operations, where there's that much malware now using up spare CPU that it's slowing systems down to a point. And I can't remember exactly where it was. There was a university, I think, over in the US that effectively had to wipe all of its systems just because it just had so much malware on it. Not that the malware was doing anything that it was targeting that organization, but it was just riddled with malware because it was a crypto mining operation using all of that spare CPU. And then there's the business interruption side. When you start to go further down, you know, this is the stuff where, yes, it does become quite tricky to model because you've got aggregation. When cloud service providers are going down, yes, there is a business interruption loss that's there. Network failure, networks going down. And then there's the debate around cyber-physical damage. You know, where are we around that? Where, you know, something causes a hacking of a, and by the way, this is just a Hollywood-type scenario. I don't quite necessarily believe that terrorists are there yet, or the motivation in which to conduct these attacks. But these are some of the stories that are now starting to concern organisations, but maybe they're focusing on that area more so when they shouldn't be. You know, a vessel being taken over, compromised, crashed into an FPSO, you know, an oil rig platform that leads to an environmental disaster. Can that happen? Yeah, of course it can happen. The art of anything can happen when you're dealing with cyberspace. What's the likelihood of that happening? Well, probably less so. Why? Because, for example, criminals are making so much money with, you know, the theft of personal data and other information that actually the motivation in which to conduct an attack like that is probably less so. Likewise with terrorists, you know, what have we seen over the last 20 years, or certainly the last 5 years with ISIS and the likes? Is actually, what are they experts at? They're brilliant at influence through social media. They're brilliant at influencing, you know, a young, impressionable person to go and wield a knife and try and stab an MP outside Westminster. That will shut down half of London for the day. And what does it cost the attacker? Nothing. So for these guys to shift that operation into the cyber domain, well, actually, there's far more ways in which they can make an impact. So it's just having an understanding of the sort of the mindset, the modus operandi of some of these threat actors, we call them. Then you can really start to understand the risk in this space. And reputational harm, when we start to look at the rep harm there, how do we actually know what the true damage is to an organization's reputation post-cyber attack? Well, if you take Mossack Fonseca, for example, the law firm that was setting up umbrella companies and companies over in Panama. Well, obviously, there was the release of the Panama Papers. That was a 40-year-old law firm. They've ceased to exist. Why? Their reputation was damaged so much that they were untenable, unable to conduct. However, then you flip that on its head and you take Target. By the way, I'm going to show you where the credit card data that was stolen from Target. Target, big US retailer, had 40 million credit card details and a total of 90 million personal records taken from its servers, where it had the payment processor servers on the same area of the corporate network as the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning company, third-party supplier that they were using. But quite interesting when you're dealing with the sort of credit card data there. You know, if Target lose your credit card details, will you go and shop at Target again? Probably, if they've got a good deal going at Christmas. Yeah. The challenge is when you compare that to a Mossack Fonseca, the reputational harm is quite damaging. So these are some of the sort of key risk areas that cyber is starting to cause. When you look at it into a different context, a business interruption type context, Maersk got hit with a devastating cyber attack, as did multiple other firms, FedEx, WPP, DLA Piper, and others, and it led to huge levels of business interruption. This was the NotPetya outbreak, which was a ransomware disguised, it was a destructive malware disguised as ransomware. An organization gets hit with a cyber attack like that, you still blame the organization for not protecting its systems very well. But yet, in a different context, a gas explosion on a high street shop that takes out 3 or 4 shops either side of that, as soon as those shops are rebuilt, insurance is paid out, you'll probably go back and shop at that organisation because you don't blame the organisation for having a gas explosion. You may not. But so this is where the cyber domain creates a whole different way of thinking when we're looking at things like reputation, stuff like that. And theft of IP. What's someone's IP worth? And these are just some of the key risk areas that cyber does bring. And our boss over at Axis, he likes to throw this one. I'm pretty sure many in the room may have already heard it, but I love this statement anyway. When you think about the S&P 500, in 1985, 83 or 85% of the S&P 500 was tangible assets, buildings, boats, cars, stuff, physical, tangible assets. Fast forward 40 years, and that figure is completely flipped on its head. 85% of the S&P 500 is this stuff here, intangible assets, it's data, it's information, it's our networks, it's our cloud service providers, it's that sort of stuff. So our whole mindset of what it is and how we're ensuring things has changed in that sense. And then you have this beast called the Internet of Things. Anyone heard of that? Anyone not heard of that? Okay. Well, what happens is when you want to connect to a Wi-Fi, normally, whether it's your home router, whether it's an office, public Wi-Fi, what happens is, first thing we do is, where's the Wi-Fi? Where's the username? Where's the password? And you plug in and you connect through a router and all the traffic that goes through one IP address. We no longer need that now. Why? Because we have this thing, the original IoT device, the original smart device. How long has it been around? 12 years? Could you imagine life without it? Not many could. Saying that, I do run these presentations sometimes, and I get somebody in the back of the room who spent the sort of last 700 years working on an oil field in North Africa, and they pull out their Nokia 3310. But yeah, the majority of us cannot live without it, the original smart device. So what happens is when these things invade our lives, they take over. In 2015, Daimler released the first self-driving truck. We're not hearing less and less about automated vehicles, are we? So it's only going to take time before the big data that feeds into the big cloud computing environment starts to refine those processes, and then it becomes normal. Same with autonomous vessels, and then what happens there, to the insurance industry, for example. So it has to, we have to start thinking about things a little bit differently in how we approach things like insurance. We can't just turn around and go, well, it's not insurable and so on and so forth. I promised I wouldn't pace. So I'm going to try and stick to where I am there. The Internet of Things. When the Internet was sort of created, built in the sort of 70s for sort of wider human consumption in the 90s, there was 3.4 billion IP addresses created for an address book. Sorry, wrong. There's an address book of 3.4 billion IP addresses. When you think about that, in the 70s, the computer was the size of this room. Sounds like a lot, doesn't it, back then? But when you think about it now, this has an IP address. I can communicate with you, you can communicate with you, and so on and so forth. Equally, I can turn my kettle on from my phone or my Amazon Echo. That has an IP address. It allows one device to communicate with another. We've now moved to something known as IPv6, which is an internet protocol. It's part of the internet's infrastructure, let's just put it that way, that then supports this. It's going to support Elon Musk's grand missions to colonize Mars. And we now have effectively an infinite amount of IP addresses in which to be able to an infinite address book of IP addresses, 340 trillion to be exact. So what does that mean? We're only going to start using more technology, not less technology. And with that, we're going to start introducing more and more risk, more and more areas in which nation states, criminals, maybe these guys, the cyber terrorists, in which they can start to go after this technology. So as we look at that, we have challenges. I'm not saying we don't. People say, oh, there's no data, there's not enough data to start modeling cyber risk. Well, actually, I disagree with that. We're actually getting very, very good. There is enough data on claims data and other data on how many data breaches are. We generally know that the cost of a data breach, a personal record, for every one record stolen is about $148, which has actually come down since 2015 from $158. Why? Because we know that there's a notification cost attached to that. We know that there's some legal costs attached to that. We know that there's some forensics costs attached to that. So we start to get granular with that data. Where it does get tricky, yeah, I'll agree. The top right stuff, the business interruption, the cloud service provider. Yeah, we do need more data in that space. But generally, when you've got AWS, for example, who are selling uptime of how you have access to your data at 99.109 now, in terms of uptime percentage, it does provide a bit of faith. You know, there are 26 Amazon AWS super data centers dotted across the US. Yes, if provided the SLAs that you have in place with that organization, you know, yes, if one does burn to the ground, blow up, or so on and so forth. By the way, these things are built to design, you know, to withstand nuclear bomb blasts. So they're pretty tough. Your data will hot over to another data center, and then another data center. So actually, it's not the big cloud service providers that, yes, I understand that this organization, that actually that does become a concern. But generally, those guys are getting it quite well. It's not those guys that we're mostly concerned with. It's the small web hosting firm based in South Korea who has a very noisy neighbor. It's the tax accounting payroll software made in Ukraine that has an even noisier neighbor. So there's a geopolitical element that we're dealing with cyber all the time when we're looking at the innovations in this space. On that note, what do we do? What do we do at Axis? No, this is not a plug in what we do, but this is where the insurance industry is going. This is where some of the stuff and some of the work that we're doing to make sure that we can, get our names out there. As you can see, some of the stuff that should be GCHQ. I'm a GCHQ certified training instructor. A lot of the training that we do is certified by, the GCHQ certified training scheme as well. So we like to certify what we do, with good accreditation, well-respected accreditation, and we've built, training programs. Our flagship training program is the UCSI course, our Understanding Cybersecurity and Insurance course. Why? Because we want to help everybody get a better understanding of this risk, a better understanding of this challenge, and more importantly, a better understanding of what you can do about it. Why? Because that helps. We do a lot of crisis management planning, simulation exercises. We've built a SciEx program, which is a cyber executive program where we'll run, senior leaders through cyber crisis management simulation exercises, and as well how insurance can help take that problem in responding. We've just literally yesterday, we're very pleased to announce that we've signed a deal with Cyber Risk Aware, a world leader in cybersecurity awareness training and phishing simulation exercises, so that we can start rolling that out for free to some of our insureds as well. Why? Because for me, fundamentally, and I come from a security background, no security or investment in any security starts without education at any level. So how do you get your end users to buy into what it is you're doing? Train them, and then once you've trained them and kept training them, fish them. Why not? But don't fish them before you've trained them, because that's just a bit, naughty in my view. We're working with a research centre, Oxford University, on a research program on modelling cyber risk and what critical controls are most effective in terms of managing cyber risk. We've got mentoring programs through Cylon, which is a bit like Lloyd's Lab in that sense. It's an incubator for cyber tech startups. We do industry mentorship as well. We're flagship sponsor for the Be Cyber Aware at Sea campaign for maritime security and raising overall awareness for the shipping industry against cyber risk. So it's quite quirky name. Great thing about that as well is, you know, things like fishing, whaling, all that sort of stuff they're great little connotations to the maritime sector. So it helps us get the message across. And finally, what is it you can do? Well, what happens when, you know, you need to rely on a response service? What does cyber insurance do as well? And it's not a plug for cyber insurance. I'm just telling you how this stuff actually works, because, you know, it's not just a case of here's your policy and in 364 days we see you. What actually happens in response to that? What's going on? Well, you're assigned a breach coordinator through a vendor that we have. And what those or several vendors that we have. And what those breach coordinators are doing is they fact find. They work out, you know, is this a data breach? Do I need IT forensics for the purposes of determining the scope of the breach? Or do I need IT forensics to get malware off the system? I may not need IT forensics to do to do either in that sense. The first type of forensics person I might need might be a forensic accountant if it's a business interruption loss. There's the notification side, there's the legal side, there's the PR side as well. How do you deal with the media? How do you deal with communicating with other stakeholders? This is all stuff. Communicating with the regulators. You might need to communicate with law enforcement. These are things that organisations need to be thinking about when dealing with cyber risk. And on that note, I just want to finish with one final little thing. I've got another slide as well, but can anyone see what's wrong with this? This is a WhatsApp scam. Go on, what was it? Dot under the A. Eagle Eyes spotted it straight away. But a lot of people go, ooh, free business class tickets, and they'll click on that URL. And the challenge with that is one of two things will happen. One is it might take you to a nice looking British Airways site, but if you look at it, apart from that dot under the A, which is a Latin letter apparently, it may take you to what looks like a nice looking British Airways site. You punch in all your details, and you've just handed over a load of information to someone, to a criminal. Or it drops a little cookie on your device, which is then used to track you and further activity than what you're into. And I think, you know, just to culminate in how we deal with cyber risk is we all need to just be better internet citizens, you know. Always update your system, be cyber aware, you know, spot the spam and the phishing, delete old data. What's the best way to avoid risk in this space? Get rid of it. Secure your own cloud, okay? Don't expect those guys to do it. They're doing a very good job of doing it, but you have to secure your own clouds. Use public Wi-Fi's. When using public Wi-Fi's, use VPNs, for example. Use a password manager. Anyone use a password manager? Yeah, good. Use password managers. And yes, when it comes, change the password on your kettle. Why? Because it's not that I care specifically that my kettle gets hacked. But you know what? That kettle could form part of a larger cyber weapon known as a botnet, which could be targeted at another organisation of some kind. So thank you very much. That's it.